Maverick News, the antivirus program for your mind. And now, the Freedom Reporters.
Speaking of RFK Jr., I brought a little video you guys might want to see of a town hall meeting that he did in New Hampshire a few days back. You probably didn't get to see it if you live in Canada because it was broadcast only on a local station there, WMUR TV. And they had him in for an hour. And, you know, they asked him about some policy things that you probably have not heard him talk about yet. And it was really good. So I wanted to bring you a little excerpt from this town hall meeting with Bobby Kennedy. Obviously, we can't play the whole thing because it was like an hour and a half. But I wanted to show you a little bit of this and see what you think about his answer to this question.
Hey,
Karen, thank you for taking my question. Our world is really a mess. Our country is a mess. People are angry and hurting each other. And so my question to you is, unite us as Americans?
The question is, how would I unite people and sort of end the polarization? You know, my dad had faced the same thing when he ran for president against the sitting president of his own party, the same as I'm doing, in 1968. And you know, my father and he succeeded in uniting the country. The day that he died, he won the most rural state in our country, South Dakota, and the most urban state, California. And he had succeeded in bridging that gap. And this was at a time that was almost as polarized as we are today because of the Vietnam War, civil rights, our cities were burning. You know, the National Guard was federalized and was shooting students on campuses. So it was really a very, very hard time in our history and nearly as much polarization. My father did this by telling the truth to people. He was running at a time when he decided to run, he was running for moral reason. Because of the Vietnam War, he did not believe that he didn't want to run. He didn't think he could win. He was going to sit it out, but he worried that somebody would put a microphone in his face and say, "Are you for Eugene McCarthy?" Who he did not like, who he thought was in the tank with the insurance companies, or Lyndon Johnson, who he couldn't support because of the war, or Richard Nixon. And he couldn't support any of them. And so he felt like the only thing he could do that was honest and forthright was to run himself, even though he had no chance to win. He had run his brother's campaign 8 years before. And but then they had the unions on their side. They had the big city mayors. They had the liberal newspapers like the New York Times. All of those were against my father. The only unions he had was the UAW and the Cesar Chavez United Farm Workers. And all the people who had been with him when he ran the first time and had gone into the new frontier were now working for Johnson. So he was really alone when he decided to run. And it freed him to tell the truth to people. So when he went to Creighton University in Indiana, and the students say, "Are you going to preserve our draft deferments?" McCarthy said, "Yeah." He said, "No, I'm not, because 45% of the paratroopers in Vietnam are Black. And it's unfair. I can get my kids into college and get the deferment. And it's unfair and wrong in our country that our wars are being fought by Black kids who can't get to buy that deferment." And he was booed. And he said, "How does that sit with your Catholic values?" And he engaged him in that discussion. In the end, he was given a standing ovation. When he went to the Indiana Medical School, the students asked him, "Who's going to pay for your health care?" And he said, "You are." And they booed him. By the end of that conversation, they were applauding him. When he went to Watts, which was on fire, he talked to them about the importance of abiding by the law, which was not a popular thing, in those communities. When he went to the University of Alabama, which he had forcibly integrated 5 years before by federalizing the National Guard, sending 18,000 troops down there, he talked about civil rights. He was given a standing ovation. When I was with him when he died in Los Angeles, and we brought him back to New York, to to New York to wake him at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And then we took him on this ride from Penn Station in Manhattan to Union Station in Washington, D.C. It was supposed to be a 2.5-hour ride. It was 7.5 hours because there were 2.5 million people on that train track. And they were the entire cross-section of the American experience when we went through the urban train stations that crawled through at 2 miles an hour, through Newark, Trenton, Wilmington, Baltimore. There were black faces, tens of thousands of them, singing the battle hymn of the Republic. In the countryside, there were whites, there were Catholics, there were rabbis, there were priests. I remember 7 nuns standing in the back of a pickup truck right outside of Wilmington, waving their rosaries at us when I passed. Little leaguers standing at attention, Boy Scouts, and it was the cross section of the American experience. And I remember 4 years later reading. I was going to college by then, and I was reading demographic data from that election from 1972. Where George McGovern had run, who was aligned with my father on every issue. And what this data showed is that those white people who had lined that track to say goodbye to my dad and who had supported him in the election, 4 years later, were not supporting George McGovern, who was aligned with my dad on everything. Instead, they were supporting George Wallace, who was antithetical to everything my father believed in. He was a racist, a bigot, a segregationist. And it occurred to me then, and it has struck me many times since, that every nation, like every individual, has a darker side and a lighter side, and that the easiest thing for a politician to do is to appeal to our bigotry and our hatred and our anger and our greed and xenophobia and tribalism. And that my father tried to do something different, which is to appeal to our populist impulses and instincts, do it by finding our better natures, by getting us to step outside of our own narrow self-interest, to transcend that, and to see ourselves as part of a larger community, part of this kind of noble experiment in, the American experiment in self-governance, to help us find a hero in each of us and take the risks that it takes to stand up for something, for a community that may not look all like you, and to avoid the seduction of the notion that we can advance ourselves as a people by leaving our poor brothers and sisters behind. And he was able to do that, and he did it successfully, focusing not on the issues that keep us apart, but on the values that unite us, that we have in common. To run a campaign that focuses on those values and focuses on solutions that are going to work for everybody, rather than the narrow tribalistic solutions that have been part of the debate so far. And that's why I don't take the easy, democratic answer on gun control, because it hasn't worked so far. It just hasn't worked. It's just divided us. But what's the thing we have in common? We all want to protect our children. So let's figure out a way to do that doesn't impede on somebody's deeply held values, other Americans' deeply held values. And if we start trusting each other again, maybe ultimately we can get gun control, sensible, common sense gun control, through consensus, other than forcing it down people's throats. So that's what I hope to do with my campaign.
Okay.
That's better.
What do you think?
I hope you guys were able to, well, you know me, I'm pro Second Amendment all the way. And I always cringe when I hear Democrats talk about common sense gun control, because there's really no such thing. In my opinion, any restrictions on the Second Amendment are an infringement. And I'm hardcore about that. He's not going to convince me. But we've brought him closer to our libertarian position or our conservative position on the Second Amendment. He used to be for all kinds of gun control. And now he says, as a presidential candidate, that even though he's for gun control personally himself, he has no intent of infringing on our rights or taking our guns. He respects the entire Constitution, the entire Bill of Rights, every amendment, including number 2. So that's a position I'm okay with. As long as you just don't infringe, we're good, buddy. And you can have your own personal feelings about gun control. And there's something I should point out too. The first federal gun control act that was ever passed in the United States was passed in 1968. The Gun Control Act of 1968 was passed by Lyndon Johnson and that Congress right after the murder of his father. And his father's murder is the reason that we got the first National Gun Control Act. There was his father's murder in June of 68. 2 months prior to that, Dr. King was killed in Memphis in April. So, and then a year before that, you might recall the UT Tower shootings at the University of Texas at Austin, where a crazed gunman climbed up a big tower with a shotgun and killed 15 students. That was one of our first big mass shootings in the United States. We'd never seen anything like it before, and it terrified everyone. And that was when, for the first time, we really started to have a national conversation about guns. And of course, everyone's emotional response was to blame the gun instead of the crazy guy who climbed the tower and shot all those people, or the person who shot MLK, or the person who shot RFK. Everyone's reaction was, well, we have to do something about guns. And that's been the Democrats' response ever since. But as Bobby said in that town hall the other night, the simple Democrat position of taking away guns is not the answer. It's not the problem. And as he pointed out, we've had guns in this country since the beginning of the country. And there are good reasons why the Second Amendment is in our Constitution. He does understand that. At least now he does. So I hope that he doesn't try to back up off of that as president and start putting some common sense gun control measures out there, because that would be a deal breaker for me and for a lot of voters. I hope he's not just telling us what he thinks we want to hear. He better mean it.
Well, his track record on flip-flopping hasn't been very good this week.
True that. Or last week, or the week before that. It seems he's still susceptible to pressure and manipulation.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this issue, it's not going to be solved that easily.
No, we've been fighting about it in the States for, almost 60 years now, since the Gun Control Act of 1968. And it's something that we still have not resolved, but at least Bobby is the only politician or candidate for president that I've ever heard who's actually pointing at psychotropic medications as having a role in these mass shootings that we're seeing. I mean, I'm pro Second Amendment, but I also do not like seeing this outburst of crazy gun violence in our country. It's out of control. It must be stopped. But the answer is not taking away guns. That only takes guns away from innocent people who are then left defenseless to criminals. Criminals don't obey gun control laws, guys. But, law-abiding citizens would be giving up their guns, leaving them vulnerable to violence against them. So,
that's right.
I still believe that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And I've seen it happen time and time again. That's how you stop them. And to address the larger problem that we have here in the U.S., I truly believe that there's a medication factor that no one wants to talk about, because all of these politicians and the press are beholden to big pharma.
Yeah.
It's sort of like that recent conversation you had with Phil Hartman's brother about his death, his murder by his wife, who was on Zoloft.
Yep.
Lost her mind. And then she shot her husband and shot herself. And, even when you read the inserts of these drugs, that are supposed to keep you calm. If you read the fine print, you see a lot of, this may cause suicidal ideations. This may cause homicidal thoughts. This stuff can cause you to flip out.
Yeah, and I'm flipping out because Gina's pointing out that people are not hitting the like button tonight.
Oh, no.
So hit the like button, folks. Hit the like button. Come on.
Help us out here.
Yeah, just hit the
Everybody's
like
against
button.
us at YouTube. We got the algorithm fighting us. We got the censors fighting us.
If you want to drive them
Um,
crazy at YouTube, just tell them how much you like the channel.
There you go.
Like, share.
It's
Subscribe,
one of the few
subscribe.
ways that we can still fight back
That's
against the algorithmic suppression of our channel.
Yeah.
When you like a video or you comment or share it, that's something that the YouTube algorithm kind of takes note of.
Yeah.
So please help us out with a like.
That's right, Mario. Just hit it. Just hit
do
it.
it. Just
Yeah.
do it. Do it, man. So yeah, I still support Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I still think he's the best man for the job. No candidate is perfect. That's for sure. I still say he's a lot better than the other options that we have. And he's learning his way. And, I hope that
See how the campaign goes.
I hope he listens to the backlash when he does do something that, like he did today, deleting that tweet with Scott Ritter. I hope he'll listen to people also who support Scott Ritter, not just the ones attacking him, but those of us who support him, and adjusts course correctly. I was kind of hoping to see Scott Ritter as his Secretary of Defense, maybe, or national security, or just an advisor to a Kennedy administration. That would sure make me feel a lot better about our foreign policy if I knew that a guy like Scott Ritter was serving the president.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.